The story begins as the main character explains that it is the Eastern Allied Kingdoms a decade later. To prevent the approaching ruin, he had chosen to become their sponsor. He admits he never thought the task would snowball to this magnitude. Once a corporate drone grinding away 78 hours a week for a small-time company, he was now reborn as a noble in a fantasy world. He describes it as sounding like a good deal, and indeed it was. The scene shifts to show him holding a book upside down, trying to read, muttering in confusion at what it says. He wonders why the words make no sense, and questions why he didn't get a free translation patch after being isekai'd. His maid, watching patiently, realizes his mistake and notes that he is holding the book upside down. The main character continues to explain his situation. To top it all off, his character trait is absolute illiteracy. He has no special abilities whatsoever. As he narrates this, one of the maids politely asks if he has finished his meal and offers to assist him with his bath before he retires for the night. The scene transitions to the bath itself. Two maids help the young master bathe, and the main character revels in every moment of this new life. He internally thinks that this is what true luxury feels like. A beautiful maid feeding him and another helping him with his bath. Aside from having no clue of his exact location, everything seems perfect. One maid reminds him that since the other young masters will be returning tomorrow, he should retire early. Hearing this, he becomes curious about who those young masters are. The maid responds, referring to young master Leo and young master Antonio. Another maid adds that they belong to the prestigious Palacio family. The main character's thoughts freeze for a moment as he recognizes the name. The mention of the Palacio family feels ominously familiar. His mind races, and suddenly, he shoves his face into the bathwater in shock. The two maids nearby panic and look terrified as bubbles rise from the water. He realizes something dreadful. He might be in psychedelia. The scene transitions as he narrates about psychedelia, the world he once knew so well. He recalls how back when he was a corporate slave, carving out small bits of time to enjoy games, psychedelia was a turn-based RPG he often played. No matter which route the player chose, the moment the five great sins appeared, wrath, greed, obsession, sloth, and pride, the kingdom, the nobles, and the cities would all begin their descent into ruin. Among them all, the Palacio County stood out as the worst. Within that family were the infamous sons, Leo Palacio, the king of debauchery, and Antonio Palacio, the king of drugs. They were known as scoundrel nobles, appearing only in a side quest before the main plot began. The story then shifts to the moment when the main character first arrived in this world. He remembers the instant vividly, and realizes that he knew this place from before. The game's rules resurface in his mind, reminding him of the side quest titled, Investigate the Palacio County of the Asteria Kingdom. It involved a prostitution and drug organization named Avalon. Standing in the grand mansion, he feels an ominous aura surrounding him. He wonders if this is truly happening, and slowly realizes the horrifying truth of all the possible locations. He has landed in Palacio County, the very first noble family in the kingdom to be completely annihilated by ruin. He remembers that the subquests related to this family used to provide a massive amount of experience points in the game. Finally, the revelation dawns on him. In this world, his new identity is none other than Alan Palacio, the third son of the Palacio family and one of the minor villains of the story. Alan was seen lying on his bed, tears streaming down his face as he thought to himself that he would rather be a corporate slave working 78 hours a week. He desperately wished to be sent back. The lavish lifestyle around him felt meaningless when he knew he would be dead in 10 years. The thought consumed him. He felt this misery was even worse than when his pay had been withheld for 6 months. His chest tightened with despair. He wondered how he could be a transmigrator without a single special perk. Muttering to himself, he lamented that the main characters in other stories always received all sorts of cheats. Then suddenly, a realization struck him. A special perk. That's right. Knowing the world's events a decade in advance was the same as knowing the future itself. He quickly sat up from his bed, determination replacing his sorrow. If he knew the future, then he only needed to eliminate the causes of destruction ahead of time. To secure a peaceful life as a noble, he resolved to reform the 5 great sins. He convinced himself that since they were still just children, it should be possible to change their fates even though he himself was completely powerless. And 2 months later, the scene shifted. Alan's personal knight, Evan, appeared before him. Evan reported that he had rescued the orphans from the Eastern Orphanage, which had actually been a human experimentation site. Among them, he had entrusted the operation of the orphanage to a girl named Utia. He affirmed his judgment was correct, praising her capability. Alan acknowledged him calmly. Evan hesitated for a moment, asking if that was meant as a compliment, since his lord's expression never seemed to change. Alan admitted that was true, then gave a desperate smile and told Evan he was counting on him. The rare smile made Evan uneasy, as he muttered that he was not sure he would ever get used to that expression. As Evan thought to himself, he remembered how his old face had once been so expressive. Meanwhile, Alan glanced at his reflection in the mirror, stretching his facial muscles, thinking how it felt like the soul had not properly attached to the body's expressions. Evan exhaled and thanked him once again for the compliment. Alan then explained to himself that in a game like Psychedelia, where betrayal was the norm, Evan was a rare gem of a supporting character who remained loyal until the end. That was why he had hired him immediately, the moment he found him. Evan soon brought up another matter, reminding Alan that the recent raid had been for the purpose of rescuing the girl named Utia. Alan confirmed that. Evan remarked that he could understand why Alan had placed his trust in her. Even after his long years as a mercenary, that child was anything but ordinary. She was so powerful that he could not understand why she had remained obediently imprisoned. He suggested bringing her to the mansion, insisting that there was nothing to gain by leaving her there. Alan acknowledged that Evan's point was sound, yet deep in his thoughts, he knew there was more to his plan. It might seem like he was wasting her power, but leaving her exactly where she was formed part of his strategy. He then revealed details about Utia Bloodia. She belonged to the monstrous Blood Clan, one who wielded the power of an indescribable otherworldly being through a pact. In the game, she became the Sin of Wrath, one of the 5 great sins, a monster responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. But Alan believed that if she grew up in a peaceful environment, she would not join the side of ruin. He proudly thought to himself that he had finally taken care of the first landmine. The reason he had left her there was to roughly assess her state and potential. With a cold and serious expression, he cleared his throat and said that something like that was the case. Though he noted that the time was not yet right, Evan was startled by the statement, repeating his words nervously. Alan then instructed him to make sure nothing about this operation leaked out and to ensure that the orphans received generous support. Evan nodded and confirmed that he understood. Alan then handed him a letter, instructing him to deliver it to Utia. When Evan asked if the contents were important, Alan explained that it was a letter of greeting written to calm her down after the trauma of being experimented on. Evan was surprised by his lord's thoughtfulness, remarking that to think he would even write such a letter, he promised to deliver it safely. After Evan departed, Alan sat back and reflected to himself. He didn't know if the letter would actually calm Utia down, but for now, he had to at least try. Hidden within the greeting was a true message, an explanation he had heard dozens of times during his repeated playthroughs. He recalled the words of the Archbishop from the game, who once said that the spell to befriend the monstrous Blood Clan would surely have a calming effect. The memory replayed vividly in his mind. The Archbishop had cried out, commanding the Sin of Wrath to be calm, chanting, "Companion of darkness, tomb of light, one hope, and one belonging." It was a key phrase that appeared during the Sin of Wrath storyline, a word or passage that held power. A brief scene appeared showing Utia in a frenzy mercilessly slaughtering people. Blood splattered across the floor. Alan remembered that in the game, this was the point where the spell failed and a battle began. But now, 10 years before those events, he believed it might not be too late to change that future. He sighed deeply, thinking that now that he had dealt with one of the 5 destruction flags, he needed to decide who would be next. Befriending a monster with a single phrase sounded ridiculous. Yet, considering her clan worshipped some otherworldly existence, it just might work. The minds of those who dwelled in fanaticism were beyond comprehension. The story then moved to Utia, who was seen reading Alan's letter. Evan stood nearby, tense and sweating. He could still sense the overwhelming demonic energy radiating from her. She appeared strange, utterly devoid of emotion. Her eyes glowed with a deathly glare as she noted that the one who sent the letter was Lord Alan. She wondered aloud why he had not summoned her to his side. Evan froze in shock, his body trembling. He could barely speak, terrified as he realized that visualizing demonic energy was only possible for those who had reached the master level. He stammered out that his lord had said the time was not yet right, repeating it nervously to appease her. Utia lowered her gaze slightly, accepting his words with a cold calmness. The camera focused on the letter, revealing its closing words. "Keep this in companion of darkness, tomb of light, one core, and one belonging." Holding the letter close to her chest, Utia whispered that this was surely a promise only her master would know. She roughly understood his will. Evan, still fearful, slowly reached for his sword, but Utia only smiled, her expression dark and eerie, as if amused by the entire situation. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Alan lay on his bed once more. He sighed contentedly, whispering to himself that it had been a fulfilling day, one spent extending his cushy life. As he looked up at the night sky, he thought even the bright moon seemed to be cheering for him. With that comforting thought, he closed his eyes, determined to work just as hard on the next one. In the next scene, Alan was seen in the library searching for a book. As he continued to look, a book suddenly fell on his head. Irritated, he muttered in frustration, feeling annoyed that there was nothing useful there. Finding a clue for the third boss was turning into a real pain for him. At that moment, Evan approached and informed him that they had successfully rescued the second child he had spoken of earlier. Hearing this, Alan acknowledged it with mild interest, asking if Evan had been kind to them, perhaps extra gentle. Evan confirmed it confidently, explaining that after rescuing them from the illegal slave market, they had treated the child well. Just then, the second son of the Count, Antonio Palacio, entered the room and noticed Alan. With a mocking tone, he remarked on seeing him there, surprised to find him with a book. He struck Alan's head with his elbow, calling him an illiterate fool and taunting that he had heard Alan had been learning to read lately. He demanded a response, reminding him that his elder brother was speaking. Alan, filled with silent anger, thought to himself how much of a pain Antonio always was and wondered how the original Alan had ever tolerated him. He longed to fight back but restrained himself. Controlling his emotions, he bowed respectfully before Antonio, stating that it seemed his elder brother wished to use the study so he would take his leave. Antonio stepped on his head and smugly remarked that at least Alan knew his place. Suddenly, a knife was thrown toward Antonio's face, but it narrowly missed, striking the wall instead. The one who threw it was the eldest son of the Count, Leo Palacio. Leo, cold and composed, remarked that the insects were causing too much noise. Antonio turned in anger, shouting in shock, but Leo warned him not to provoke him further, saying he did not wish to see blood so early in the day, and ordered both of them to leave. Antonio, refusing to back down, grabbed Leo by the collar and sneered that perhaps his brother should leave the stench of the rabble outside when entering the study. Leo swiftly raised his knife to Antonio's throat, his voice calm yet threatening, warning him to stop polluting the place with his drugs and to get lost immediately. Watching this escalating confrontation, Alan felt a wave of irritation and quietly slipped away from the scene. As he walked out, his mind analyzed the situation, recalling that the Palacio family in the game had only been minor characters who disappeared early. Yet, their influence and power in reality were far greater than he had imagined. He remembered that within this family were two scoundrel brothers, fiercely battling for the family seat, one known as the Underworld Kingpin, the King of Debauchery, and the other the King of Drugs, who ran a vast cartel. Evan soon escorted Alan away from the area, while behind them, the two brothers continued their violent quarrel. Alan's thoughts grew clear. If he wanted to live a peaceful and comfortable life, he must never provoke them under any circumstance. He decided to live happily as a weak and incompetent illegitimate child, avoiding all unnecessary conflict. Later, exhausted, Alan sank into a sofa with a sigh. Evan, standing nearby, mentioned that the second child they had rescued wasn't exactly ordinary. Watching Alan, Evan wondered silently how someone like him, who seemed barely capable of taking care of himself, had managed to uncover secret biological experiments and illegal slave markets just to save children. He couldn't understand the reason behind it. Alan lay tiredly on the sofa, murmuring that it was all so draining. Evan continued to observe him and commented that his young master was truly peculiar. He pointed out that Alan was sending the child they had just rescued to an orphanage as well. Alan simply nodded in quiet confirmation. As he thought to himself, Alan reflected on Evan's words that the child wasn't ordinary. In truth, she was far more than that. She was a world-ending catastrophe. The child rescued from the illegal slave market of the Kalian Kingdom, the central nation in a union of several countries, was none other than Deus Mran, the second boss of psychedelia. After being sold into slavery and passed from one hand to another, suffering endless abuse, he would later become the sin of sloth among the 5 great sins. Eventually, he would annihilate entire kingdoms in the most horrific manner imaginable. That section of the game had once horrified players with its extreme brutality. Despite his title, the Sin of Sloth had been a diligent monster who repaid any harm done to him many times over. Alan remembered repeatedly warning him in the game to treat Evan well. This hardcore gamer before him now had insane potential, a terrifying fate waiting to unfold. While sipping his tea, Alan calmly stated that the reason he had sent her to an orphanage was simply because the time wasn't right. Evan then asked if the letter Alan had sent to Lady Utia had been about the second child. Alan replied vaguely that it was something like that, just some friendly everyday chatter. He mentioned that he had told her he was sending a troubled child and had asked her to take good care of them. Meanwhile, in another place, Deus was standing alone when Utia approached him. She observed his state and remarked that he was broken. She noticed the marks on his body, identifying them as the work of the black goat. With a strange composure, she told him that the great moon had chosen someone like him and offered congratulations. She urged him to feel the power he had been bestowed with and to unleash what was rightfully his. If he devoted himself entirely to serving her, he could have his revenge. Utia extended her hand in friendship, but from her hand emanated a dark, negative aura that caused Deus great discomfort. Afterward, Utia took out the letter sent by the second brother, read it, and commented that along with a simple greeting, she supposed she should now send her first reply. The scene shifted back to Alan, who was buried deep in books, flipping through pages in frustration, muttering that he still couldn't find where the third boss was. His patience was wearing thin. Suddenly, Evan came rushing in, visibly panicked. He exclaimed that there was a huge problem. The second young master, Antonio, the very one who had taunted Alan earlier, was dead. Shocked, Alan froze for a moment, his eyes wide with disbelief. The thought echoed in his mind. That scoundrel was dead already? Then the scene shifted to Antonio's funeral. Everyone attended, including Alan and Evan, standing among the mourners. The atmosphere was grim. Yet the Count, Antonio's father, arrived in an appalling state, high on drugs, flanked by 2 beautiful women dressed provocatively on either side of him. The 2 women clung to the Count affectionately. One of them, running her hands along his arm, complained in a bored tone, asking when this would finally end, saying she was tired and impatient to return to bed. The other woman added that she was hungry. Watching this disturbing display, Alan felt disgust rising inside him. He thought how twisted it was, coming to his own son's funeral high on drugs with women hanging on each arm. He had known the Count was a corrupted man, but this was an entirely new level of dark fantasy depravity. His thoughts drifted to Antonio's death. For him to die of suffocation so early was strange. The details of his death were different from what he remembered. In the game, after years of suffering, Antonio had finally killed that vermin himself. And in the end, his body had become the undisputed heir of the Palacio family, the new Count Palacio. He remembered how Antonio had once wailed dramatically about how much he had suffered to achieve that victory. Yet now, looking at the Count's face, Alan could see that his father wore a "what a windfall" expression, as if he had gained something rather than lost. Alan noticed that grin and immediately concluded that the culprit behind Antonio's death was either Leo or one of Leo's cronies. Still, he reminded himself of his goal. All he needed to focus on was dealing with the 5 great sins. A year passed after Antonio's death. With the issue of succession resolved and Leo taking over the family's drug business, the Palacio household gradually grew more peaceful. During that time, Alan's correspondence with Utia continued regularly, and the two became pen pals. Later, Alan and Evan were seen sitting together, eating quietly. Alan thought to himself that steadily building this rapport with Utia would certainly prove useful in the future. Soon after, he opened a letter and began to read. The letter mentioned how Gino was excellent and loved playing, and that the dear child was growing up wonderfully without any issues. Reading the words, Alan smiled, commenting that they sounded like such good kids. His eyes then fell on another line. The list of sponsors for the orphanage had grown again. He found it strange that such a small orphanage kept receiving more and more sponsors. Evan, noticing his expression, remarked that it was unusual but still a good thing. Then he remembered something and mentioned that they had received information about the matter Alan had been searching for so intently. Evan explained that the Information Guild had found a clue. Hearing this, Alan expressed relief, realizing that it must be related to the third boss. Finally, he felt a rush of satisfaction, believing he could soon locate that person. It was a perfectly peaceful and idyllic evening, the calm before another storm. Meanwhile, in another part of the kingdom at a drug distribution hub known as Marek, 2 members of the organization entered the area. As they walked inside, one of them remarked that the eldest Palacio's son was incredibly generous, and that the rewards they received were always amazing. The other replied that their organization had already grown to several hundred members strong, and that their future looked even brighter. But when they stepped further inside, their words froze. All around them lay corpses, the bodies of their comrades, blood pooling across the floor in every direction. Shock overwhelmed them. Then suddenly, both of their hands began to move uncontrollably on their own. Their bodies jerked as if possessed. Before they could comprehend what was happening, their hands, guided by an unseen force, thrust knives into their own throats, killing them instantly. It was then revealed that their bodies were being controlled from afar by Deos and Udia. Udia observed the scene with amusement, commenting that she had enjoyed today's puppet show as well. She noted that the list of sponsors to report had grown again. Deos, watching the massacre, questioned the meaning behind these actions. He said he did not feel pity for the victims as they were wretches who ground up human beings to produce their drugs. Yet, he could not understand how this act contributed to his revenge. Utia calmly responded that it was indeed meaningful.